Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. I used to visit my girlfriend at her college a couple hours away from mine. It was in a very rural area. I usually drove back the same way, but I needed my GPS to get to the highway. This was around 2 a.m. This time my phone was nearly dead, so I used my old navigation GPS, and it took me a different way, out the other side of the campus and through a long winding road in the woods. It was very dark, and the only light was from my high beams. There were some houses here and there, but after a while I started to notice that a lot of the houses had statues of humans on their lawns, very close to the road. As I drove further, I started to see what looked like potato sacks covering many of the statues' heads. At this point I had been on the road for over 30 minutes, and had passed only 1 or 2 side roads, and those may have been long driveways. It got really creepy when I saw a group of 3 statues, one that looked like it was a child, but had some kind of pig mask on it. The other 2 had sacks on their heads as well. I was only going about 20 miles per hour. It was a very winding road, and it looked like someone had put an actual pig's head on it. As soon as I passed the 3, floodlights came on. At first I didn't think anything of it. Lots of people have automatic floodlights. But then I thought, why are they pointed straight at the road? Up until now, I hadn't seen any other cars. Seconds later, I noticed 2 people running towards the road, through the woods, wearing sacks on their heads. They were running straight to the road, and I booked it immediately, doubled my speed. About 5 minutes later my GF called me to say goodnight. I definitely shouldn't have said anything, but I was creeped out and described what happened. She started to yell at me, but before I could finish the conversation, I noticed lights in the distance behind me. A car was coming up behind me fast. Way too fast, and I was already going dangerously fast. I dropped the phone and focused all my efforts on driving. As it got closer, I noticed the car was a truck, and it had a bright-ass light bar on top, which looked like 4 high beams blinding me. I could hear a lot of noise, which I thought could be music, but as they got closer I could tell it was yelling, and possibly chanting. They got right up on my ass, and that's when I saw it. A bunch of people wearing sacks on their heads, leaning out of their windows, yelling and screaming. The driver had a pig head on him. I was sweating just trying to stay on the road, when I saw them try to go around me. I didn't let them. They tried again and again, swerving left and right to try to get a chance, but I stayed right in front of them. Every time they swerved, I saw a second, smaller car behind them, also with people wearing sacks on their heads, hanging out the windows and yelling. A couple of them seemed to have baseball bats. I'm the guy to normally let people pass me if they're faster, but this looked like they definitely wanted to get around me and trap me in between them. Finally I decided to do something stupid, and I opened my sunroof and tossed out a box of Kleenex. It was all I had. I saw it hit the car and the tissues flew out everywhere, and they were completely unfazed but started honking and yelling louder. They suddenly turned off all of their lights and started to get really damn close to me. They bumped the back of my car and even scratched up the sides as they tried to get around me. Let me tell you, in my entire life I had never seen anything as creepy as these sack faces lit up by my red rear lights as they tried to run me off the road. That part lasted for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I remember thinking how I wish I had a gun or anything to defend myself because these people were fucking nuts. But I finally saw some streetlights in the distance up ahead and a tiny little bridge. As I crossed the bridge, they stopped and turned around. The highway exit was across the bridge, and I finally felt safe and drove back to school. When I finally spoke to my GF again, she told me there were no statues on that road. But the scratches are still on my car 8 years later. I'm creeped out again now. This is great. I can't get the image of their red lit-up sack faces out of my mind, and I need to sleep. Another story I have heard to add to this. My friend and I were on a hilly, here in rural upstate New York. That's where you drive around the back roads all through the hills and get high. So we were smoking and talking about life and stuff. It's like 11:30 p.m., dark and scary because there are no street lights or houses on this particular road. And out of nowhere we come across a dude in the middle of the road flagging us down with his cell phone flashlight, covered in blood. Like fucked up. Pants torn, jacket torn, face a mess. I am a really paranoid person, and I was high so I instantly started freaking out inside. My friend, who was the one driving, is much calmer than I, but also was like, what the fuck? We stopped the car in the middle of the road, just before we got to him, and got out. He yelled to us, I need help, I just hit a deer. This dude hit a deer in the middle of nowhere with his motorcycle. His bike is just lying in the road some 20 feet away from him. We get a better look at him, and this guy is just really banged up. My friend starts trying to calm him down because he's both fucked up on adrenaline from the experience and possibly concussed. She tries to get him to sit, but he begs us to help move his bike out of the road. We help, and then I just start getting really lightheaded because this is the kind of dire situation I don't want to find myself in when I'm high. So I just lower myself to the ground and sort of start having a panic attack. My friend was really stretched thin, being the only one who could try to help this guy right now because I just shut down. She called 911 and got an ambulance dispatched to us and proceeded to interact with the guy, asking him things like his name. It was Paul. He had just gotten out of his teenage cousin's funeral and memorial service and went out for a ride to clear his mind. And he fucking hit a deer on his motorcycle, flew God knows how far, and was fucked up on his face, hands, legs, whole front of his body with road rash. He kept asking if he was really fucked up, and my friend took a picture of his face with her phone to show him. He was freaked out, but conscious, but we were really concerned about him being concussed and couldn't figure out exactly what all of his injuries were. His cell phone was working and was on his person, so he called his parents. The ambulance and EMTs came and did their thing with him, and shortly after, his parents showed up. They were still dressed completely in black, nice funeral attire. They thanked us over and over for helping him. It was obviously a rough night between the funeral, and now their son being totally screwed up in an accident. Paul got strapped to a gurney, loaded in the ambulance. A police officer briefly questioned my friend about the situation and any information we had, thanked us, and gave us the all clear to go. And just like that, we were back on our hilly, like less than an hour later. It was wild. We actually saw the deer on the side of the road a few yards away once the police officers got there, because we were all scaling the road a little bit looking for his shoes, which both flew off, and some parts of his bike. It was freshly dead. We later found out my friend is nosy AF and found Paul's mom on Facebook and messaged her, I think, that Paul spent several weeks in the hospital. He had actually been gored by the buck's antler in his abdomen. He had several injuries we couldn't identify at the scene and needed surgeries. That is hands down the craziest thing that has ever happened to me while out for a drive at night. It happened maybe 5 years ago. It also kind of helped me realize that I need to be able to keep my chill in dire situations so that I'm able to help. I'm CPR certified, but I don't know if I can trust myself to be the person who might have to save a life if there's an emergency situation, because I wasn't good for any of that. My friend was the one with the composure who did all the assistance while I had a freaking panic attack. Went on a cross-country RV trip this past spring with my friend Melissa and her 7 kids and 2 young German shepherds, starting in West Virginia, in a 20-year-old RV christened Big Betsy. And almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong, haha. Among other things, the water lines broke the night before, so we had to rely on jugs of water the whole trip. The gas tank cap was busted, so it was a bitch to get the cap off. Tires had good tread, but a couple were pretty old, so they worried me. We found out the AUX batteries sucked, so we needed to jump start them with a power supply every time we stopped. The main battery cable had a bad connection, so every time we started the engine I had to stand in front and jiggle the cable while she turned the key. The slide jammed, and we had to get a pry bar to get it in and out. Driving through Colorado Springs, we blew a spark plug out and had to stop for repairs. Luckily, her brother, who used to be a diesel mechanic, was traveling with us, only took a day to fix. Regardless, we were still having a great time seeing the scenery, stopping at landmarks and national parks like Garden of the Gods, Mesa Verde, and the Grand Canyon. The furnace went out the night before we got to the Grand Canyon, and it got down to 17 degrees. I got up every hour for 10 minutes to heat the RV a bit using the propane stove, turned it off to rest, and then did it again every hour that night. Went to Roswell, Las Vegas, then on to Malibu to see the ocean, and LA for a couple days. Then we headed up to Yellowstone and were blown away not only by the park itself, but the drive there from California, through Utah and Idaho, just so breathtakingly beautiful. If you've read this far, you've come to the point of the story. After Yellowstone, we had to leave from the west entrance since the other roads east and south hadn't been opened yet. We drove up into Montana, and for some reason, her brother insisted on getting off I-90 onto a two-lane highway through the Crow and Northern Cheyenne reservations. He was perpetually driving like an hour ahead of us because his RV was faster, and he's a bit of a reckless dude. But we didn't want to be far from him in case we ran into engine trouble again, so we didn't really have a choice but to follow him, even though I voiced much hesitation on taking a backroad route in the dead of night through a reservation. So we find ourselves taking the ramp to RT-212, had just gotten onto the Crow Reservation and stopped to gas up, and immediately things just feel odd. It's past 10 p.m., and as I'm pumping gas, I'm hearing children running around playing off in the dark, and cars keep driving up slowly to check us out. I get back in and Melissa is already saying, "Get us out of here, it's creepy as fuck," so I do. We haul off down 212 in pursuit of her idiotic brother. Alright, he did save our bacon in Colorado Springs, so maybe idiotic is too strong. There's just nothing out there. Inky black skies, long desolate roads, sporadic groups of 4 or 5 houses every few miles. I'm acutely aware that we lost cell service as soon as we got on that highway, so I'm just praying that nothing goes wrong. I try to ignore the acute feeling that something is watching us. Her dogs start whining in their cages. The feeling of unease has continued, and I really don't want to stop, but Melissa said we needed to let them out to poop or we'd be cleaning up a mess. I pull over next to a big field, and she gets her oldest daughters Ariana and Isabella to leash them, and I throw open the door and let them out. As soon as they hit the grass, the 2 German shepherds sight on something out in the darkness and start going absolutely apeshit. They're barking and straining against the leash, and the girls are struggling to control them. My blood pressure spikes. I look over at Melissa, and she looks completely bewildered, and I reach up to the overhead compartment and pocket my handgun I brought for protection. We get the girls and the dogs back in the RV and peel off down the highway again, cognizant of the fact that we're probably going to have to clean up shit since they wouldn't potty outside. They're back in their cages and are continuing to whine. I drive on for another 30 minutes or so, and they're still whining, and Melissa says we really need to stop again to let them go outside. This is the last thing I want to do, because the whole time, I still feel like something is watching us, and I'm just running through my head all the scary stories I've read about evil spirits, Wendigos, and motherfucking skinwalkers and shit. And I reason with myself that I'm just scaring myself, and they probably smelled a fox or coyote or something, and I really don't want to clean up dog shit from the cages on the side of a forgotten highway using jugs of water in the dark. We pull over again, and this time I take my gun with me and walk outside with the girls as they take the dogs out. I distinctly remember thinking, I don't know what good a gun will do against evil spirits, but I'm not going down without a fight. The moment their paws hit the ground, they immediately start howling and barking into the darkness again. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I look at Ariana, and she has this look of terror on her face. I say to the girls, "Get the dogs back in the RV, we're getting the hell out of here." But her dog Hazel is straining so hard at the leash she can't get her inside. So I pick up this German shepherd in both arms and fucking heave her through the door and run inside. As I lean out to pull the door closed, I think to myself, this is the moment where something with sharp claws grabs my arm and pulls me into the night. Thankfully, as I'm here writing this today from my bedroom and not the belly of a Wendigo, this does not happen. The dogs go back to their cage and continue whining. I jump back in the driver's seat and gun it down the road, and Melissa leans over and says in a panicked whisper, "What is going on out here? Don't you feel it? Am I crazy or something, or does something feel really wrong?" I glance at her and remember one of the big no-nos of skinwalker lore. You don't talk about them, you don't even think of them if you can help it, because it draws their attention to you. I say, "No, you're not crazy, but I can't talk about it right now. I feel it too, but just trust me, we can't talk about it right now." As I'm cresting a small hill on the highway, I look over at her and say, "Just trust me here. We'll talk about it later, okay, but we can't right now." I look back ahead, and there is an enormous white rabbit standing on its back legs in the middle of the road. Looking back now with the benefit of a cool head, I'm sure it was just a bit bigger than normal, but I'm telling you in that moment, it looked huge, like it was 3.5 feet tall. I swerve this 37-foot-long RV around this beast of a hare, but thankfully keep control. I put the pedal to the metal and say, "I'm sorry, I don't care if the dogs shit in their cages. I'm not stopping again." And I didn't. And thankfully, they didn't LOL. We made it to the town of Spearfish safely and stopped for the night, and after visiting MT Rushmore the next day, we recounted the fear we all felt that night, and I told Melissa specifically why I didn't want to talk about it in the moment, and she said, "Yeah, I knew why. I've read all kinds of stuff about Native American legends." And I realized later with a chuckle that maybe those spirits were real, maybe they weren't. This happened to a friend of mine. Here is their story. This actually happened to me just this past Halloween. I'm commuting to work in a different city, and I'm working third shift, 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. Hate the hour drive home, but the pay is solid. So I get out of work after my Saturday shift, and it's now 3 a.m. on the Sunday morning of Halloween. As I'm getting on the highway, I belatedly realize it's Devil's Night, and I'm just glad to be on the highway and out of the city center without any traffic, drunks, or cops. Now, I live in the Midwest, and that is the worst time of year to be driving at night around here. Deer are rutting and acting all kinds of stupid, and gun season hasn't opened up yet to call their numbers. There have been deer carcasses scattered all over the highway for the last few weeks, so I'm driving super careful. I have my cruise control on, and I'm barely going the speed limit. About 20 minutes into my drive, two sets of headlights overtake me a few minutes apart. The first just keeps going, and becomes a set of tail lights ahead of me. I relax a bit, as I now have someone in front of me to hit the deer for me. I affectionately refer to it as having a fullback. Once this other car is a good way in front of me, I speed up a little, as I know I don't have to be as paranoid. That's when the second set of headlights overtakes me. Except they don't. They were about to pass me, but they ended up just sitting in my blind spot for about a mile in the other lane. I realize I sped up a bit as they were trying to pass me, and I hit my decelerate button for my cruise control twice so they can finish passing me. Except they don't. A rundown, black Jeep pulls up next to me, matching my speed. Their cabin light was on, but the windows were so fogged up I couldn't see anything. I thought it was a bit weird that they were driving side by side with me, but didn't really put any extra thought into it. I hit the decel button again, and they eventually pulled past me. The Jeep never changed lanes, and eventually caught up to the first car that had passed me. And I watched from a mile back as both sets of tail lights just drove on in front of me, side by side. At first I was really happy, because hey, extra metal in front of me to hit deer. Then I realized how weird the whole situation was. At this point, I was doing about 75, because I was trying to keep the distance between us small enough that deer weren't likely to run out into the road between us. It was weird, but it was getting me home faster, so I wasn't complaining. Then the first car to pass me hit his brakes and pulled into a rest area. I was bummed, because it meant I needed to slow down. It meant some extra time to get home, but hey, better than hitting a deer and needing a tow. As I'm slowing down, I realize that I'm still pretty rapidly catching up to the Jeep that was matching my speed earlier. I don't feel like involving myself in that weirdness again, so I back off on my cruise control some more. Except that I'm still catching up to it. I look down, and I've slowed down to about 55, and I'm still gaining on this car that was a mile ahead of me doing 80 knot a minute ago. Every warning bell in my brain goes off at once. I reached back to make sure the Louisville Slugger I keep in my back seat was free and easy to grab, and I turned off the cruise control. I have no idea what kind of weird Pisco shit I've suddenly found myself in, but I'm ready to drive like hell to get away. It was at this moment that it clicked for me that the car that turned into the rest area probably did so because this Jeep was creeping them out, and they were trying to get away. After about another 30 seconds, I finally catch up to this Jeep, and I'm only going 50 or so at this point. They're still in the left lane. Right as I'm about to pull even with their passenger window, I gun the engine and shoot past them. There's an interchange for a major interstate route in a few miles, and a few miles past, that is a way station where there's usually a state trooper or two hanging out. As I'm debating my options about which would be best to take, the Jeep goes flying past me. This time, he keeps going, and I eventually lose track of which tail lights are his when he gets mixed in with some semis a few miles later. I don't know what the hell all of that was. Was someone drunk and just not paying attention? Was someone out trying to spook people on Devil's Night? Or was it some psycho out on the highway looking for someone particular? I have no fucking idea, but I was goddamn shook the rest of the ride home. The whole thing ended up being pretty anticlimactic, thankfully. But that was easily the weirdest thing that's happened to me driving at night. I stopped at a gas station back in 2008, and there was a guy who was using a payphone to talk to his girlfriend, or ex. He was screaming, and said he was going to kill somebody because of her. As I was getting in my car, he looked at me and slammed down the phone. I started my car and drove off. I was a little worried, but didn't consider his threat to be real. After a few minutes, he catches up to me on the main road. He starts tailgating me, and I get the weird suspicion that he actually wants to kill me. I'm a little overly paranoid about the world, so I react almost immediately. I take a few random roads that make no sense, totally out of the way to get to where I am going, and sure enough, he follows me. Finally, I get to the gate of my community. I put in my password, and the gate opens. He speeds up before the gate closes to get in. I see this often though, so even though I'm concerned, I just go on with it. Right after I make the left turn into my cul-de-sac, I finally realize that he 100% following me. There are too many roads for him to live on my street. Each street has 50 condos, but mine only had 8. So anyways, instead of using a blinker, I just jerk my car to the left and get into my street. Seriously, dude goes straight, missing the turn, and slams on his brakes. You can even hear it. I'm more curious than anything else, so I keep looking at my rear view while going the speed limit. Guess what? I see his reverse lamps turn on. I literally slam the gas on my Xterra and get to my house. I turn off all of my lights inside of my car, not sure why, and I bolt out and run into my condo. I turn off all of the lights in my condo, and I look outside. There was outdoor lighting, so you couldn't see in if the lights were off. He parks his car, but leaves it running, gets out, paces around my car, gets back in his, and drives away. The next morning I get my cold groceries from the gas station and throw them away. This was in Sarasota, Florida University, and 75 back in the day. Also, one night in Gainesville at CVS at night, a guy said, "Hey," and I said, "Hi." This was back in 2010. He then said, "I just want to ask you a question." I was like, "What's the question?" He then proceeded to move towards me aggressively, so I decided to jump in my car, the Xterra again. I locked the doors and rolled down the window. He said, "I just want to ask you a question," in a normal tone. I said, "Well, you can ask me while I'm in my car." He then said, "Just get out and let me ask you a question." I said, "Nah man, I'm good, just ask me while I'm here." I then proceeded to put the car in reverse. As soon as my car started to move, he started screaming, "I just want to ask you a question." He then started to sprint towards my car after I switched to drive and kept screaming, "I just want to ask you a question." This was on the corner of SW and Archer, if anybody is familiar with the area. Finally, a few months ago, I was in a different car now, lol. I was with 4 friends, and we went to Wawa for some late night subs. We all ordered what we wanted to and left. No problems at all. As we were leaving, a car zoomed past us on a 30 miles per hour road and cut us off. I see this often, I don't think twice about it. To be honest, that speed limit is way too slow, and most people ignore it. Anyways, the car continues to speed, going at least 60 miles per hour until we cannot see them. Finally, after a mile or so, the car slams on their brakes and pulls into a driveway. The driver gets out, no shirt, and takes a piss on this person's property. I think nothing of it, based on my experience in Florida. This seems kinda normal. We pass them, take a few turns, and all is well. Out of nowhere, this goddamn car comes up to us and starts tailgating us and starts swerving and wilding out. We start to joke about how this dude is following us. Half of the car agrees. The other half says we are pussies for thinking that. I do as I normally do and start to drive in a direction that makes no sense. Instead of going from point A to point B, I go through the whole alphabet, lol. We finally realize after the 8th or 9th turn that this dude is following us. What's incredibly funny about this is that the dudes who were acting hard and calling us pussies started to get really scared, ha ha ha. Anyways, finally we get to a highway road where the speed limit is 50 miles per hour and it's 3 lanes. I decided to get in the right lane and go around 30 miles per hour. This is almost always validation in regards to whether or not you're being followed. Pro tip, if you're going half the speed limit and the other lanes are open and there is still a person behind you, you are either A, being followed, or B, it's an old person. So after turning into the right lane, the dude gets in the left lane. We are all halfway disappointed, but 100% relieved that he isn't actually following us. However, guess what happens next? He slams on his brakes and moves to the middle lane to get right next to us. As soon as that happened, I slam on the gas, and we get away by making a last-minute U-turn, and that's it. It's almost like driving in FL at night is a risk. I'm not from FL. I hated it back in the day, and I still do. The people from country Florida are what they are, and they aren't like me. I ended up living here because my wife is from here. For whatever reason, her father loves it. It's been a headache ever since. Out of the 30 years of my life I've spent on this earth, less than 6 of them were in FL. I'll be goddamned if I haven't seen more shit down here than anywhere else combined, times 10. A guy I spoke to shared this story with me. A strange thing happened to my wife and I back in around 2005/2006 while driving at night in the UK. We were driving from my wife's parents' house in Somerset quite late on a Sunday night back to our house in London. It was a clear, dry evening. There was nothing remarkable about the weather or anything else for that matter. Towards 10 p.m., we were approaching a town called Corsham in Wiltshire. I was driving and my wife was navigating using a road atlas. As I remember, the surroundings became more built up with street lights and trees in a spot where a couple of other roads joined ours. My wife said that we needed to keep going straight and pointed directly ahead. There was no traffic waiting to join our road, so I carried straight on. I double-checked both roads again, when suddenly a thick patch of mist shot across the road from right to left in front of us. It must have been about 10 to 15 meters across, about 5 meters high, and my guess, it was traveling at about 50 miles per hour. The speed it appeared at was quite alarming, and I instinctively hit the brakes and saw our headlights, the pop-up type, temporarily disappear into the mist, which then engulfed the car as it passed over us. As this happened, I became disoriented. I was fully conscious and knew that something odd was happening. I went dizzy and experienced the sensation of my car seat being spun backwards 360 degrees with me in it. I could see the road ahead, but due to the dizziness, it suddenly appeared to go vertical and then fall to the side before becoming normal again. In the meantime, I knew I was driving and that there was no other traffic, so made a conscious effort to hold the steering wheel straight with both hands and brake to come to a halt. The mist carried on its way, and after a few seconds, everything cleared. A bit shocked, I asked, "What the F*** was that?" To which my wife answered, "I have no idea, but I feel like I've just been spun backwards in my seat, and I went really dizzy." We pulled over to the side of the road and gathered our thoughts before continuing with our journey. We were both quite shaken. We've no idea what might have been in this mist to cause us both to get disoriented in the same way. It arrived, traveling at speed, and was then gone. It wasn't a windy evening. This mist seemed to be traveling, rather than just blowing around, if that makes sense. There was no smell to it, so I don't think it was a chemical cloud of something that disoriented us both. But I guess it could have been. The car was always maintained properly, and wasn't leaking any fumes into the passenger compartment. Besides, the car was a convertible and, while we had the roof up at the time, it wasn't nearly as airtight as a normal car, so any fumes wouldn't necessarily hang around. I'm not a meteorologist, but there was no reason why there should have been any mist around that night. I was driving, so definitely hadn't been drinking. Nor had my wife. The car has quite a firm ride, so there was no wobbling effect from soft suspension. All things I've considered, but haven't come up with a viable explanation. It was only when looking around online recently that I found that Corsham seems to be quite well known for underground mines and buildings. I think there was something more to this mist than normal. I'd love to know what. Edit. I kind of expected this to get lost at the bottom, but the replies are welcome. I've looked into it on occasion over the years, and the only thing that fits the bill is a thing called a time storm. These are basically disorienting mists that appear suddenly, and the people who experience them lose time somehow. The mists are there for a second or two, but maybe 20 minutes pass for those who experience them. I can't say if time passed. The car had no clock. We didn't think to look at our watches. Maybe it was one of them. I don't think we'll ever really find out. I'm a bit late to the party, and my rule of thumb tells me to not waste my story on the 550th comment, but I simply cannot pass this one up. I grew up in rural Indiana. When I say rural, I mean middle of absolutely fucking nowhere Indiana. The closest grocery store was a 15-minute drive in good weather without traffic. I used to love exploring, and would just go driving around on new roads simply to see what there was to see. In doing this, I have come upon more than my fair share of something's not quite right kind of roads. Here are the stories I can remember off the top of my head. Number 2 is the creepiest. Number 1. I have been followed before. I was out driving in an area I'd never been to before that was impressively extra-rural. No houses, no telephone poles, nothing whatsoever for miles. The road takes an unusually shaped turn through some especially thick trees, and halfway through that curve you are suddenly met with a decline down into a beautiful creek valley. If you've ever heard the term the hollers of Kentucky, but never had a mental image of just what in the fuck a hollow is, this is it. A picture-perfect example. There was nothing but thickly wooded inclines back up to standard elevation for the region to my right, and on my left is some short distance of still young cornfield and a creek. Beyond that was the other side of this little valley, sloping back upwards towards normalcy and also heavily wooded. This place is beautiful, and I'm very much enjoying myself. The hollow isn't terribly wide, but good lord, it was longer than you'd expect. Very unexpectedly, I come around a curve in the hollow, as it follows the creek, and am suddenly in view of an upcoming property on my right nestled into the wooded incline. I pass one single rundown house with a couple of barns in an advanced state of decay, heavily overgrown yard and small collection of very ratty cars in various states of disassembly, all of them quite heavily rusted. It was daylight, so I couldn't tell if lights were on in the house, but it was the kind of place that you see and just immediately, unquestioningly presume to be long abandoned. This was not the residence of the farmer of those fields, as these barns housing the necessary tractors, trucks and various equipment was just right out of the question. It would have been financial suicide via a never-ending game of Russian roulette with gravity/roof instead of a gun. How is this house supplied with electricity, you might ask, if there are no telephone poles on either side of this road? Well, that's a goddamned good question, 'cause I've been pondering it for years now and have no clue. The entire valley now feels uncomfortable and unwelcoming. I can't explain it, but I just simply knew that someone's with Slash were on that property when I passed. Less than 5 minutes later, this bright orange jacked-up Chevy pickup is in my rear view. He's gaining on me. I apply some pressure to the gas and make a turn back towards the nearest small town. He turns and is still gaining on me. I pick up the pace and make another turn towards the closest real town, the one with the grocery stores/restaurants. This guy is still coming and is getting closer and closer. I turn, then turn again and again to get onto the main local road. There's other cars around now, but none between myself and him. I've managed to maintain space between us, but I'm not positive that it wasn't without his allowing it. As I am now very close to town, I turn off the local highway. There weren't very many cars out anyways, to use a small out-of-the-way back road I like that comes into town right by the hospital. He follows me. I continue along this route with all its senseless turns and backtracks. He's following me still. I finally lost him on the real main road by blowing through a yellow light and speeding beyond any reasonably defensible amount. 911 dialed in my phone and ready to go. Number 2. I'm out exploring, and I'm in yet another impressively extra-rural area. The county road here follows the creek, then suddenly turns away from it and comes up out of the valley. Then there is a series of 90-degree turns navigating fields whose owners saw to it that the local roads wouldn't be a perfect grid pattern. It's fast approaching dusk on a long summer day. The windows are down, and I'm playing my iPod on the radio with one of those FM transceivers that you punch in an empty radio station's frequency, and it'll broadcast your iPod onto it. The next 90 degrees jog comes up, and I find that it can go on straight if I so chose. No mailbox, there's even a road sign. It is a public road. There was no bridge out sign, no road closed, nothing. The road, if you went straight, wasn't paved. It was barely gravel. It was a 2-track with grass in the middle. I'm in a large Dodge Ram with a small suspension lift and other bells/whistles. Fuck it, let's go. I start down the road, and after a small stretch with real tall corn on either side, I come to some woods. The woods are very thick, and my radio suddenly goes to static. It's just now reaching dusk, and there is an orange sky in my mirrors, but now it is very, very dark in these woods. The road is devolving rapidly. It's turning into more of a trail than a road. Where a modern road would have concrete sides and guardrails over small brooks, here the gravel just used bigger rocks. I hit a real big bump, and my radio suddenly comes in clear as day. Do you want to die a virgin? I laugh it off, noticeably shaken. I murmur something about an unfriendly Johnny-come-lately. It goes back to static immediately, and to my left a meadow opens up through the trees. My worries are immediately gone, and I tear off down a small decline into the meadow, exploring in 4x4. It's getting darker, so I head back to the trail/road and turn to continue the way I was going originally. The radio is coming in and out with unintelligible talking. I reason to myself that it's one of those audiobook channels. I come up to a dead end. There's no way to turn around. The trail/road used to have a bridge here, but it's long gone, and before me is air and water. I'm trying to figure out if I want to try to turn around or what to do, and I notice 5 people, 2 across the way where the road begins again, 1 on the bank opposite me, and 2 downstream on the bank I'm on. They're all staring at me. Assuming I've interrupted some fishing time, I back out down the trail/road towards the current roads until I find a clearing wide enough to turn around. I decide to go through the meadow once more, not creeped out at all honestly. I should have been. After some time in the meadow, I notice a spot in the tree line where I could go down to some very wet dirt and go for it. I get down there and horse around a bit. The radio comes on. Have you made your decision? Okay, now I'm a bit creeped out, and decide to keep my cool but exit the area. The radio is now silent, not static. I make to go up the incline back into the meadow, but can't quite do it with the slippery mud. The radio comes back. Time's up. Static. We're coming. Okay, engage fully freaked the fuck out mode. I turn off the radio and shift it into 4 low and gun it. I make it up the incline into the meadow and notice all 5 guys are now in the treeline of the meadow glaring. I fucking noped the fuck out of there at full speed and went flying down the trail/road back to the real road, just in time to see the sun deep below the horizon. The drive home was silent and mentally exhausting. I have never returned there. The area. I'll update or clarify later if there's interest. Right now I'm late to class. I remembered the other really good story I have. In high school I had an extremely close friend. It was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of friendship, but that's another story and it's sad. On the very same back route I mentioned in story number 1 that comes out by the hospital, my friend, myself, and another mutual friend were on our way out of town towards my parents' house with fresh fireworks for the 4th. It was on the night end of the evening, with the sun behind the horizon for a few minutes by this point. This road follows the interstate for a ways, and then peels off to join the countryside grid pattern, with conifer windblocks on both sides the whole way down the stretch parallel to the interstate. We come around the corner out into the grid pattern, and the trees open up to farmland. Parked in the middle of 1.5-lane county gravel, facing away from us is a red Jeep/SUV thing, with 2 teenage-looking guys standing at the rear bumper grinning like damn fools with firecrackers going off all across the road. I pull to a stop. My friends and I were, past tense, all pretty big guys filled to the brim with naivety. We just sit there thinking, what now? One of them turns around and walks back towards the front of the Jeep/SUV, and my friend I mentioned at the beginning got very serious in a big hurry, tapped my shoulder and said, "Just go." He wouldn't explain anything else, just kept repeating, "Go, just go, drive around them." At this point I thanked the stars we were in a larger vehicle, and we just went through the ditch and kept on moving. In our rear view, and their headlights, we saw the 2 guys standing at the front of their Jeep thing now, holding something. We couldn't tell exactly what, but it wasn't hospitality. That went from WTF to get the fuck out in a big hurry, and was how I learned people do car traps. In college I had to drive from the North Chicago suburbs to St. Louis to meet up with my girlfriend, who traveled down a few days earlier with her sorority to meet up with a chapter at a different school. I was supposed to leave mid-afternoon and make it by dinner. On a good day it's about 5 or so hours. It was spring break, and I had a late final. I missed taking it during finals week and had to make it up, long story, which is why I was lagging behind my GF and driving down to meet her. The plan was take the final at 10 a, pack up, eat lunch, leave around 1 or 2, and make it by 7 p.m. or so. The professor surprised me and told me the makeup final was going to cover slightly different stuff to protect against cheating by talking to others that had taken it at the normal time. So, I ended up pulling a nighter studying for it, and afterwards I didn't eat. I just crashed thinking I'd get a couple of hours sleep in. I ended up sleeping all day until 10 p. I was chronically short on sleep in college. The nighter put me way past my limit. When I woke up, I was kinda out of my head a little bit, you know, that fogged out feeling. So I get in touch with my GF. She's wondering where the hell I am. I tell her everything is okay, and I'll be down tomorrow. I hang up and think I should surprise her by rolling in late tonight. She'll be partying till 2 or 3 a.m. with her sorority anyway. I show up and grab a quick shower, and we can bang it out. This is college thinking. So I pack, and I'm on the road before 11 p.m. About halfway, right in the middle of nowhere, I start getting hit with this weird tiredness. I just slept all day, so I figured I just needed to push through. I thought I'd pull off at the next info sign and grab some coffee. About 15 minutes later, I see a sign and turn off I-55 and drive to one of those convenience store/gas stations. I pull up feeling just wiped out, so I think I'll just recline my seat and take a little rest around back. Felt vulnerable to nap under the lights. The entire gas station plaza and store front was lit up, but around back it was in shadow. I pull around and lay back, and that's the last thing I remember before coming to on the road, behind the wheel doing 80 miles per hour. There were 2 extra large coffees from the place I'd stopped, both empty. It was about 4 a.m. I'm waking up because the car is sputtering and jerking. I'm the only car on the road. I note that there's a Springfield sign saying so many miles. When I pulled off, Springfield, Illinois was my next waypoint. I drift off onto the shoulder as the car dies. I'm completely out of gas. I wait for someone to pass, still dead tired. There are no cars. It's black night with only the interstate lights and cold. I realize my clothes are drenched in sweat, so I dig in my bag and pull out several layers of clothes and basically strip and redress on the side of the road. I get back in and start dozing, hoping a car will come by. Finally, the sun comes up and reflects off the frost on the road through my rear window, bouncing around the interior and blinding me through my eyelids. I wake up feeling somewhat in my right head again. About 10 minutes later, a state trooper pulls up behind me. My car obviously hadn't moved in a while, and he saw me before I saw him. He approaches, and I explain I've run out of gas in the middle of the night. I'm trying to get to St. Louis, etc. He goes, "Son, you're heading the wrong way for St. Louis," obviously thinking I'm on something. "No," I explain. "I just saw a sign right there as I was pulling over. Springfield is this way." I point down the road. "Son," he says, "you are in the great state of Missouri." He points to his uniform. He's a Missouri state trooper, not Illinois. "That sign is telling you how far we are from Springfield, Missouri. You are headed to Tulsa." I can't explain to you what it feels like for your brain to reboot, but mine did. I was trying to understand and piece together what happened, but I couldn't make sense of it. The trooper took me in for DUI and had my car towed, but they didn't find anything in my system. Somehow, I blacked out, bought 2 large coffees, bought just enough gas to make it through St. Louis and nearly halfway to Tulsa, and drank the coffees while in a fugue state driving along. Another trooper later told me, when releasing me later, that day they had received a call in the night from another driver that had passed a car fitting my description, doing 35 miles per hour in the middle lane. They sent a trooper out looking for me, but didn't find me until the next morning after sun up on the side of the road. The driver who called said they were very unsettled by me. They couldn't get my attention. This was before cell phones in the late 90s. They called it in from somewhere off the road. The weirdest thing is that this timeline doesn't make any sense at all. I've gone over it a bunch of times, and there's no way I would have had time to make it from when I left to halfway from St. Louis to Tulsa when I gassed out, especially pulling off to sleep at the gas station, and later doing only 35 miles per hour for a stretch. It's like when I blacked out at the convenience store I teleported or something. Also, there's no explanation for no cars or trucks on the road. I swear I didn't see any vehicles of any kind anywhere for the entire trip once I was in rural Illinois until the trooper. Yet I-55 and I-44 have at least truck traffic at all hours. And someone called in saying they couldn't get my attention, so I can only guess that I was hallucinating an empty road. I do remember feeling alone in the world, completely desolate during the night, and I just accepted at the time that it was normal for there to be no people anywhere in sight. Even at the convenience store/gas station, I vaguely noted that there wasn't a soul in sight. When I pulled around back, I thought I'd better get out of sight, because if someone saw me and wanted to do something, there's no one around for me to get help. It seemed natural that the store would be open but with no one in it, not even an employee. My only guess is that once I got onto the rural part of I-55, I must have succumbed to highway hypnosis and did 100 plus mph all the way down before I pulled off. Then I don't know what happened, and I ended up overshooting St. Louis, probably getting confused by the Springfield signs making it seem like I was still in Illinois because I was on autopilot, so I somehow found my way to I-44, around St. Louis instead of I-55. Sleep deprivation is a trip, kids. A similar road trip story from my cousin. Me and my roommate took a drive from VA to Las Vegas for our last spring break. We both had work on the preceding Saturday and upcoming Monday, so not to waste any time getting there we agreed to make the trip in one go, no stops. It was a 30-hour drive across multiple time zones. We saw the sun rise and set multiple times on the drive. Obviously, we were both caffeinated up to our ears, and surprisingly were able to work out a system where one of us slept while the other drove and switch off whenever we hit exhaustion. About 18 to 20 hours into the drive, my roommate wakes me up for one of my shifts. We're in Texas and driving through a torrential downpour. I can barely see anything, and there's no other cars on the road for me to gauge myself with. This put a mountain of stress on my shoulders, and by the time I drove out of the storm it was pitch black outside, no street lights of city lights in sight. Exhaustion was setting in, and the GPS told me I had 100 or so miles to go on this road, so I woke my roommate up so he could orient himself before taking the wheel. Naturally, we're chatting about what we're going to get up to in Las Vegas and college stuff in general, so I'm paying less attention to the road. Not looking away from it or anything, just trying to focus my mind on the conversation to fight exhaustion. A few minutes into the conversation, my roommate says something like, "Do you see all these red lights, or am I tripping?" I look to my right and see red lights slowing, strobing on and off for miles upon miles into the dark horizon. I look to my left and see the same thing. We go back and forth contemplating what they might be for a while. Coincidentally, we had just turned on a Joe Rogan podcast about the Navy confirming the UFOs exist and talking about the different variations. The lights have me pretty shaken up now, but I'm powering through these last miles trying to get to the next test stop and refuel. Then, I guess with hallucinations setting in, it starts to look like all the lights are converging on our location. No big deal, I tell myself, until my roommate confirms that he's seeing the same thing. We turn off the podcast and wind down the windows for some cold air and hear the most constant humming sound coming from all around us as we're driving. At the point, we're both shitting our pants, thinking we're about to get abducted by aliens. Just as I'm thinking I'm going absolutely mad, the sun starts to rise, and I see all these blinking lights are just windmills. Got a good laugh in, and is definitely something I won't soon forget. I have two to share. First was a shock scare, the second still haunts me. About 5 of my friends and I were headed toward Traverse City, Michigan for a fishing weekend when we hit a Michigan road construction traffic jam. We were about 20 miles north of Bay City, so all you could see was traffic and farmland. After slogging through a stretch of road at 0 to 5 miles per hour for 20 minutes, the boys were getting restless. The ASC didn't work, to boot, and it was terribly humid. It was one of those June days when it's threatening to storm, and you hear thunder, but nothing ever drops. We opened and hung out of the windows like idiots, engaged with other cars' passengers, and started playing catch with another car using a tennis ball. Like I said, idiots. Anyway, the point is that a couple of us were hanging out the passenger side, facing the roadside. Thunder rumbled quietly all around us, but other than that the air was just thick and quiet. I zoned out and closed my eyes when, suddenly, a lightning bolt struck road debris less than 10 feet from our stopped van. I think the bolt struck a log or something similar, because the pop that I heard sounded like gunshots and an explosion. I was so startled that I slammed my head into the top of the window and peed my pants. The second memory was like a waking nightmare. I went to college in rural Michigan. Other than the town my college was in, there wasn't anything but corn and soy fields for 10 miles or more. Total bummer for those that were bored all the time. A total boon for those of us that liked to get high in corn fields. Campus safety was super strict about on-campus smoking, so my buddy and I used to go for drives and park on country roads. One night toward the end of our senior year, our roommates and most of our friends went on a school trip to D.C., so Buddy and I didn't have much going on. Made sense to go for a drive. At about midnight, we hopped in my car and drove out about 3 miles down a stretch of road, parked between 2 cornfields, and sat on the roof of my car to roll up. I left my parking lights on and the windows down. Stars were out, weather was fine, crickets and frogs were chirping. Perfect night. We smoked down a blunt and began rolling a second when we saw headlights coming. We decided to slip back into my car and act like we had just pulled over for a second. As the 2 headlights approached, I remember trying to hear the crickets and frogs, but it was dead silent. It was as if sound had been sucked out the earth. What's more, as the headlights became even with my driver's seat, there was nothing behind them. There was no car, no truck or tractor. Okay, time to leave. But as I turned my key, a body about 6 feet tall walked out of the corn about 20 feet ahead of us. Looked like a shirtless man, but it never moved its head or arms. It just walked across the road and disappeared into the corn on our side of the road. No face. Honestly, it was like the alien from Signs. My engine didn't start. I remember quickly trying again to turn over the engine and accelerating. I didn't think to roll up the windows, and I had the window lock on for some reason, so my buddy couldn't roll up his window. As we pulled onto the road, a scream or high-pitched blast or something broke the silence. My buddy swears that the body walked out of the corn again and just stood there as we pulled away, this time just a couple feet from the car. I didn't see that, but I did see 2 headlights in my rearview mirror. I realized we had just smoked down a joint, but this was too real. Needless to say, never went for a smoke by a cornfield ever again. More proof of something. There were 2 dark marks on the rearview mirror the next day. That shit happened. I sold the car the next year, but every time I look in the rearview mirror of a car, I can't get this memory out of my head.